Hi, welcome back to C.O.G Music. I'm Steve, and I wanted to do this next video on something I've been noticing with my practicing and continuing using that Mel Bay beginner's guitar chord instruction book that, like I said, I've had for many years, but I've noticed something. Now, I am in no way knowledgeable of music theory, but I wanted to focus on seventh chords because there's something I have noticed in some of the exercises in the book that really seem to strike a particular pattern with me anyway. The reason why I opened up the video with a picture of a clover leaf on and off ramp to highways is because when I'm going through these particular exercises in the book and I get to the seventh chord, that's the first thing I visualized as far as what they are and how they can be used. It seems like when you're going from one chord that has a very particular sound to another chord that has another particular sound, that seventh chord could be used as a connection from one to the other when it doesn't seem like going straight from one to the other makes a lot of audible sense to me anyway. It's like a particular chord going directly into another chord, just it sounds like there's something missing. And what I've noticed in these exercises is that seventh chord seems to be the great segue from one particular chord into the other. And like I said, I just conceptualized traveling on a highway in a particular direction and kind of having to get on a different highway that's going in a very different direction. And that seventh chord acts as that off and on ramp from one chord into the other. That's just the way I pictured it in my head. But let's get into the examples of what specifically I'm referring to. And towards the end of the instruction book, they have these different key chord progressions. For example, this particular one is the key of E chord progression. Now, all of these chord progression exercises have the same pattern. It starts with a chord that correlates to the key that the chord progression exercise is in, followed by 3 minor chords, and then a seventh chord, and then returns back to the chord that the key of the chord progression is in. For example, this one, like I said, key of E, E, G sharp minor, C sharp minor, F sharp minor, B7, I'm going to play through that a little bit quicker. But that B7 there, in between the F sharp minor and the E. See, that now what I did there was I just took out the B7. I went straight from the F sharp minor back to the E. And you could hear how there's definitely something missing. Like something should be connecting that F sharp minor chord to the E. Now, one of the things I've done and noticed is instead of using a 7th chord on that B7, use a B chord. And it kind of works audibly, but it really changes the mood that the chord progression has already established with all of those minor chords in a row. But let's do that. I'm going to replace the B7 chord with a B chord. Now, that difference between that B and B7, that's a very, I don't know how to, I'm thinking of a word. That B7 chord is much more melancholy, I think would be the correct word. That B chord is a very uplifting chord. To me, it sounds very uplifting. But the chord progression up to that point, in my opinion, has established a melancholy feel to it. From that E to the G sharp minor, C sharp minor, F sharp minor, B7, do you notice how that seems to fit in more with the feeling that's already been established in the chord progression? Not that that B chord doesn't work. And this chord progression, I guess in a song with that B chord, could definitely be used, but I think the mood that the songwriter would be trying to convey using a B instead of a B7 would be a much more uplifting type of song. So let's try a different one. This is in the key of A. This particular one goes A, C sharp minor, F sharp minor, B minor, E7, A. Now again, let's try. Well, first, let's try just taking out the E7, going from the B minor straight to the A. Once again, it definitely just sounds like something is missing there. Like something needs to connect that B minor back to the A. But let's try it. But instead of using an E7 chord, we'll use an E chord. Now that, to me, it doesn't have that uplifting feel using the E chord instead of the E7 like in the previous exercise and changing the B7 to a B chord. This to me just doesn't sound correct. It definitely has some type of not fitting in at all feeling to me. The E chord, going from a B minor back to the A by playing an E chord in between those two rather than an E7. Let's try that once again. Now let's compare that, playing it with the E7 chord. Again, to me, that E just doesn't sound right. The E7 chord, and it's such a subtle difference, but making that smooth transition from that B minor chord into the A chord, that E7 chord just works, to my ear anyway, just so well. And there's just this feeling of incorrectness when playing an E chord rather than an E7 chord. But using another exercise to kind of illustrate what happened in the first exercise, let's play this chord progression in the key of C. Starting with C. And again, let's just not play that G7. We'll go straight from a D minor back to the C. Again, there's definitely something not there that needs to connect that D minor back to the C. So let's replace the G7 with a G chord. Now again, similar to that first exercise, this definitely, it doesn't seem wrong to me. There's definitely a very attractive sound to that G chord in between the D minor and the C. But it just seems to convey a much different mood and feeling than the G7 chord in between the D minor and the C. Let's play it through with the G7 chord. And now let's use a G. Again, that doesn't seem incorrect, but the mood is very different, in my opinion, using that G chord. That up feeling coming with that more up sounding chord. That G versus the G7. The G7 seems to fit in with, again, that melancholy feel, which I think comes from the series of 3 minor chords consecutively. You know, you start out with a chord that correlates to the key the chord progression is in this case C, but then you have those 3 minor chords, E minor, A minor, D minor, and then getting back to that C, that the progression, the key of the chord progression, the connector there that seems to fit in really well with those 3 minor chords is that, in my opinion, is that G7 chord. It fits in with the mood that's already been established with the chords that have already been played up to that point, in, again, my opinion. Again, I don't know anything about music theory, and there are great channels out there related to teaching that. It's just something I've noticed and wanted to convey, practicing and continuing with my practicing, and also continuing using this particular book and getting to these chord progression exercises towards the end, and just noticing the very logic that seems to be used in what they've done using the chords in the order that they've used. And it, like I said, it immediately popped into my head when I got to that 7th chord. Really connects well with returning to the chord that conveys the key that the chord progression is in. It just seems to work really well, in my opinion. Fits in well with the tone, mood of everything, and feeling that's gone up to that point. So I just wanted to make this video on that. Now, obviously, again, there's different uses for different chords, and seventh chords obviously are a very important feature in blues progressions. But in this particular case, I just wanted to stick to these chord progressions and what appears to me that these seventh chords are used for in a particular purpose. So I hope maybe this was a little bit educational. You know, maybe I've completely misconstrued something. Leave it in the comments. I really appreciate you checking out this video. Remember, whatever you do, when you're practicing, when you're playing, have fun. And I'll see you on the next video. Take care.